That Podcast Network and the It's Me Speaking to You podcast presents a podcast series for the archives. I talk to the producer and director of the Tupac assassination series, as well as the latest groundbreaking docuseries, Tupac Cover-Up. RJ Bond comes and talks about his many years researching and reporting on this case. And we will go episode by episode, breaking it all down. It has been way too long, and there are still way too many unanswered questions. Buckle up. You do not want to miss this. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, it's been a hot minute. We are back after a little bit. Life can tend to throw a couple curveballs, which can throw a schedule off. But we are back here to break down episode 6, the final episode of Tupac Cover-Up, with my good friend, RJ Bond. How we doing, RJ?
Greetings, Jeff. Doing well. Thank you for asking, my friend. Things are great.
Absolutely, absolutely. Every day above ground's a good day, and it has been a minute. You and I have been in contact quite a bit, but all of our schedules and life stuff, it just, just throws curveballs, and we just have to bob and weave the best we can, but here we are.
Yep, absolutely.
You've been busy always, and you're on the road right now, keeping yourself busy. And there's obviously, we're going to talk about it here towards the end after this breakdown of this last episode, some interesting developments in the case of Keefe D.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, let's start with this final episode 6 of this amazing series, you guys. You got to check it out. If you haven't seen the docuseries Tupac Cover, actually all of RJ stuff, Tupac assassination has just been, it's been amazing, an amazing ride these last almost 20 years. And he's really killed it with this docuseries. To go on to Zumo, go to Tubi, and where else can we catch this, RJ?
I mean, it's all over the place now. It's on Roku. It's on I don't want to say, gosh, what's the name? It's down in Australia now. Oh, and
Did
as
you catch
of
that?
either today, either as of today or tomorrow at the latest, Tubi has announced that they've released it in the UK. So we're finally
Nice.
getting some overseas traction with Tubi. That's great because they're over there, but they had only been releasing it in the US. So it is. Check it out. You can plug it in. Tupac Cover-Up. Just put it in Google, and it'll tell you where it's playing. I mean, it's on down in Australia too. So we're getting a lot of good coverage, and soon to be on Amazon.
Getting that worldwide international mileage. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, it is absolutely worth it. RJ's done an incredible job in all of his projects, but especially this one. So let's go, man. Episode 6, Dereliction of Duty. We start out with this one with the late great, of course, Frank Alexander, asking himself a question I can only imagine that he and other people who were around Tupac, who cared about Tupac, asked over and over again. What if? What if I did this? What if I moved left instead of right? What if I carried my weapon? What if I did all these different things, which I can only imagine would drive somebody crazy?
Yeah, Frank was haunted for most of his life about what happened that night.
Yeah.
There's a fine line you can draw between, following what your employer tells you to do and doing what your heart tells you to do. Sometimes those go together and sometimes those are far apart. And then he got a lot of backlash in later years. He got a lot of backlash about, well, I'm doing it, not carrying my gun and things like that. Did I do it because they're my employer and they told me to do it? And is that true, or was that a cop out, or did you want your job more than you cared about the safety of Tupac? I mean, there were some real haters that came out about that and talked about how, oh, Frank's just trying to cover his ass now, and I think even Reggie Wright Jr. Alluded to that he had a choice, he made a choice, and now he's trying to blame somebody else. So yeah, the what if game was something
Well,
that
and
Frank.
not to, yeah.
Good.
And I mean, I can only imagine. I mean, I'm not judging him. He's not here to defend himself, and I'm not in his shoes, and I wasn't there. But he did have that option to carry, to not carry. He was aware. I don't know if you helped me out. Was he aware prior to this night that Tupac had fired him, and Tupac told him, "Don't worry, Frank, you're coming with me." So he had job security, right? A
I
certain
don't know
measure.
that I don't know that Tupac ever directly communicated with Frank that there would be employment for him outside of the Right Way Protective Services bubble. There was clearly some confusion as to whether or not Right Way had in fact been fired. And clearly, if they had been fired, and I'll give Reggie Wright Jr. this. I mean, when they came in and they said that Tupac had been, fired Right Way security, the question would go, well, if they had fired Right Way security, why were they still, why were we still working? But Suge Knight cleared that up and said that it didn't matter whether or not Tupac had fired Right Way security or not. Suge was the one paying Right Way security.
Correct.
Tupac was
Correct.
indirectly paying him because they were recouping it from his royalties, but Suge was the one that was actually paying for people to be there. So Frank's, continued involvement with Tupac kind of went around the Right Way security, and it was a direct, thing from Suge. Now,
Right.
having said that, the instructions to leave your weapons, they were at a club and were told to get out around the club. They were at a restaurant, and they got told not to carry their weapons. And the problem that Frank had was kind of a procedural one later on in that evening. He had planned to take his gun with him to Club 662 and keep it under the seat of his car, but park his car right up next to the door at Club 662, which would have been maybe 5-10 feet away, so that if he needed his gun, it was available to him. So the idea of not
Right.
carrying your weapon is kind of strange. Reggie's painted it so many times that you only,
Yeah.
you couldn't carry your weapon because of what was happening at Club 662. Frank was actually going to bring his weapon in. Of course, Reggie was armed and Michael Moore was armed. There was a bunch of people there. So that idea
Yeah.
about not carrying weapons in a club doesn't seem to hold a lot of traction. But
Facts. Whole facts.
yeah, yeah. Nonetheless, Frank, when they picked up their cars to go to Suge Knight's house, that was Frank's last opportunity to be anywhere near his gun. But because they told them not to carry guns, he had to leave it in his car. What are you going to do? Leave it in your hotel room?
Right.
That
Yeah.
makes no sense. So, you know, Frank didn't park in valet. Frank, like most hired help, parked in the self parking garage. And if you've ever been to a casino, that's a half hour, 45-minute round
Right.
trip to
Yeah.
get to your car and back. So, he at no point, and this actually even speaks to when they left and he took Kadada's car. There's not a lot of room in those kinds of situations if you're being thrown a curveball as to what the security plan is. If they're doing everything by the seat of their pants, Kadada's car had no gas in it, very little, it was on empty. And Frank couldn't and wasn't in a position, as far as he felt, to raise his hand and say this car has no gas in it. So he was
Oh, right. I do
truthfully,
remember that part. Yeah, the car being
yeah,
out of gas and he couldn't stop because he was a part of the obviously security entourage. Yeah, I remember that part.
yeah, he
Interesting.
couldn't do that. So he ran on 100-degree night. He was running the car with no air conditioning because he was trying to make sure the gas lasted that
Oh
long.
my gosh, I forgot about
So
that little variable.
yeah,
Again, this is
so
the torture he was going through with the what if. What if I
what
had
if
gassed
yeah,
up, all of it.
what if I had told them that they needed to put gas in the car? But again, his inability to speak up not only spoke of the culture, don't question anything, don't speak
Right.
up. But again, he had detractors, he had haters that said, hey, well, maybe that's just a convenient excuse. You should have raised your hand and said, I'm going to carry my weapon because. And to be honest, as much as I love Frank Alexander, you still have to kind of consider whether or not that's a thing, because Michael Moore was told the same thing, and he decided to carry his weapon.
Right. I was just gonna say that. Yeah, Michael.
You
Michael
have to
carried.
kind of contrast the two. Was it an absolute thing? Nobody held a gun to anybody's head and said, "Don't carry your
Right.
weapons." They said, "Don't
Yeah.
carry weapons." Some people chose to listen. Michael Moore didn't get fired. He said he got relocated, but he didn't get fired for
Right.
saying, "Fuck that! I'm not going to carry the weapon." Okay, that wasn't how that went. So, there's probably an argument to be made on both sides of it, but that's really what it
Yeah.
comes down to, and why Frank was so involved in the what if game. That's the long way of explaining it.
It makes sense. It truly does. But we move along here, and I mean, this one really kind of just hits a lot of points here as you summarize this whole series. After Frank kind of, drops his stuff about what if, we move right into May 25th, 2017, this Memphis drug ring hit that involved Reggie Jr. and Reggie Sr. Now, these guys got involved. Let me explain what this all was.
Do you want me
The
to
drug
explain?
stuff that,
Yeah,
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 sure,
that were
absolutely,
in Memphis. Yeah, go ahead. I'm
absolutely.
sorry.
There was a drug shipping ring that started in Tennessee, and there was a using the U.S. Post Office. Illegal drugs were being shipped back and forth between Los Angeles and Tennessee, and there was a a gang in Tennessee that was handling the distribution and sales of those drugs. So the manufacture and production of the drugs was happening in LA, shipped out to Tennessee. The gangs were distributing the drugs in Tennessee. And that's how that rolled. Through the indictments and the investigation, it was found that the source or one of the sources of the drugs coming from Los Angeles was none other than Reggie Wright Jr., the former head of security for Death Row Records. And based on that, there was an indictment against him for drug trafficking, federal indictment for drug trafficking. Along with that, they noticed that, of course, Reggie Wright Jr. was placing money that he had received from the cash being sent for the drugs. He was receiving that via interbank deposits. So the gangs that were paying for the drugs would go into U.S. Bank. I think that was the bank. Go into U.S. Bank and would deposit with an account number $9,999 to not trip off the $10,000
Yeah.
suspicious activity report that the banks are required to file with the federal government. So they would do that, and they would get, two payments of $5,000, a payment of $9,999, et cetera. But they were putting them directly into Reggie Wright Jr.'s bank account. But they were also putting money into other bank accounts because the money was coming in fast enough that they didn't want to keep putting it into one bank account. If you keep having $9,999 deposits into one account, that's going to add up. And somebody's going to notice. Right. And at that point, clearly there's a pattern there. So Reggie had to come up with a couple of other bank accounts to use to launder this money. One of them was his daughter's account, okay, which is despicable as far as I'm concerned, that you would involve your children in your money laundering activities. But that account was identified by the federal government. I'm not making that up, and I'm not taking a hit at him for doing that. That's a fact. And the other account that he put the money into was his father's account, Reggie Wright Sr., his account. And he put a lot of money in that bank account. And Reggie Wright Sr. allegedly, between the two of them, Reggie Wright Sr. claimed he had no idea that the money was being put into his bank account. I guess statements don't matter. Reggie Wright Jr. declared that his dad didn't know anything about the money being deposited in the account. I can't speak to whether or not they had alerting or, usually your bank lets you know, but you do tend to check your bank balance from time to time, unless you have so much money that you don't care how much money you have in your bank account, which
I was just going to say, unless you're just financially independent, like nobody's business. Care. Yeah. You'll miss.
Yeah. So
you don't see 9,999 going in your bank account every other day.
That's right. And at the end of that story, both Reggie Wright Jr. and Reggie Wright Sr. were convicted of felonies. Reggie Wright Sr. Reggie Wright Jr. having the greater amount of felonies, money laundering, drug trafficking. A lot of charges were dismissed. I think they had 18 counts against him. A lot of charges were dismissed because he was a cooperating criminal. He was willing to accept responsibility, and he maintained that his father had no knowledge of it. Reggie Wright Sr. was actually convicted of a felony, which money laundering, and he didn't serve any jail time, but he was asked to pay $200,000 in fines to the federal prosecutors to, I guess, atone or buy off his sin. He got a fine for it. So he didn't do any jail time. Reggie Wright Jr. did about 15 months in prison over it. But now they are branded and stuck with the fact that they are both convicted felons, which is quite a hit for somebody that's a former cop to be convicted of that. And, they're drug traffickers and money launderers. What more do you say?
Well, and Reggie was looking at, multiple decades, if not, 20 to 25, maybe 30 years, and does 18 months. And I forget who it was in the doc talking about the hubris of certain federal informants like Whitey Bulger. I mean, I think I'm untouchable. I can do whatever. I can keep tricking off because I'm protected by the feds. And obviously you see Reggie had that type of hubris because he only did 18 months. I mean, for me, that's about as huge as a red flag you can get. And we substantiate that Red is and has worked for the federal government. But that's another telling sign right there.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you take 120 years outside, that's the maximum sentence, and practical sentencing guidelines are 12 years, 10% of that, and then you whittle it down to 18 months. Something's going on in the background there. So, there's information's valuable. If somebody can sell their
Yeah.
inner access to things or information about what's going on. My only question was, if by that time, other than his own activities, uh, with the gangs, the only information he had to sell would have been about his partners in um, Tennessee, where they came from. And so with that in mind, rolling over on your potential business partners or your potential fellow, indicted people, it's
Hmm.
just bad business, kind of snaky all the way around.
Well, for sure. And I forget in this episode, someone asked, either it was the prosecutor or one of the police officers, like, was there any informant helping out to assist this prosecution? And of course, they didn't answer that. But again, seeing the lenient sentence that Reggie received, one can almost sort of surmise where that assistance might have came from. But of course, that's allegedly, and we're speculating. But
Yeah, that was a big thing when that prosecutor was asked that question. He
we,
just smiled, a little smirk, and he says, "Yeah, we'll get back to you on that one." Yeah, you knew
right,
the fix was in. He
pretty
said,
much,
"Good question, though."
right. It, Well, and as we move along, we start bringing up Keefe D. And at the time, Keefe D was being looked at for the stuff with Big. And then there's again a substantiating that Keefe was an informant from the FBI going back to 1998, which is very fascinating. Like we've talked about, we got the feds all over this place. Like you asked Suge, hey Suge, was there anybody who wasn't a Fed working for you? And you
Right.
got Keefe going back to freaking 98 being a Fed. Now we know Reggie was working going back a long ways. It's crazy how these guys have been dipped. So many have been dipped with the Feds.
Yeah, I think it's a culture. I think there's a culture of, the FBI is not afraid to throw money around, and neither is the ATF, the
Right.
DEA. I mean, we don't talk about them too much, but a lot of these cats that didn't have a lot of big income going on, and one of the things about Keefe D that I've always believed is that he's not the person that he portrays in his book. He wasn't a guy making millions of dollars or living the life of Riley. This guy was hand to mouth pretty much all his life, had a lot of kids to raise, grew up in a poor family. A lot of these guys gravitate towards the money that the feds are throwing at them, to speak out, to give information. And so Reggie Jr. might call them cooperators or cooperators. I'm still trying to figure out where that line is, that if you're a former cop and you snitch on somebody, that you're not snitching, that there's some merit to
Right.
that, versus the guy who's not a cop who does the exact same thing, yet he's a snitch.
Right.
So, trying to figure that out. But I think one of the things that we bring up in the whole Keefe D thing, and we talked about Keefe D in several episodes earlier along the way. The big thing that we start to bring out is, Keefe D puts out this story about his, alleged claims of being involved with the murder of Tupac Shakur, and his cousin or his nephew Orlando Anderson being in the car and all that. And yet we started to watch over the time that every time Keefe D told a story, that story changed. There was some detail about it that was different. And he would tell
Yes.
complete stories, as we captured in the movie, that were complete fabrications.
Yeah.
And so when you detail those in a book and you detail those in the YouTube interviews, and not only are you making up complete fabrications, it's never the same details twice. Well, then somebody's lying about it, because the truth is just the truth.
Right.
And so when
Right.
he was changing his stories, we wanted to catch that. But the other thing I wanted to catch, and I thought it was more important, was dishonest broadcasters, dishonest journalists. That if somebody's lying, and we pointed it out, there are some very convenient edits in some of these broadcasters, and I don't think I should name names, but they know who they are. Um, these big name YouTubers and YouTube channels, that they know that somebody's lying about something, and they edit it to make sure that it doesn't go any deeper than that, or they cut to something else
Right.
and they cut
Yeah.
it off, because what's coming is, either a bad detail of that, and they get nervous about how much information is actually wrong. But These guys just let them say anything. There's no fact checking. I guarantee you, Vlad TV, no fact checking. They'll whatever you say, they'll take. There's no he'll ping back a little bit. He'll ask a little bit. I think Art of Dialogue is better about it. The Art of Dialogue channel, I think there is a little bit of pushback. In fact, Art of Dialogue asked TPD.
He did. I think it was him. He was the one
Yeah,
where Keefe kept saying, "Yeah, no, we hooked up. We met him Friday, man.
yeah,
They rolled up in the Rolls Royces. We saw him Friday, and we saw him Friday. He kept saying we saw him Friday, we saw him Friday. And then I think it was Art who was like, "Yeah, man, I've interviewed so many people in this, and they didn't get there till Saturday, bro. There
yeah.
was
They
no
weren't
way."
there
And
that
then
day. Yeah, so
Keefe's
what
like,
are you
"Oh man,
talking about?
I'm getting old. Maybe it was the fight before that." I'm just like, "Bro, come on, man."
Well, that
He's
was
trying to help you clean it up.
he didn't actually clean it up with Art of Dialogue when he said it was all that was Vlad later.
Was it okay? Yeah,
Yeah, he didn't clean it up with Art of Dialogue. Art of Dialogue asked him about it, and he did the Scooby Doo, the
yeah,
look on his face about it. What? And
yeah.
and 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 he did that. Oh yeah. Well, Vlad then realized that he had allowed him to be saying some pretty irresponsible thing, and of course, that's going to blow their whole narrative if
Yeah.
if KVD's lied about it. So they have to address it to get him to clean it up. So he
When
addresses it
it's
and
such
goes,
an
"Oh yeah, my
inconsequential
memory's bad."
lie, it's so
Huh?
inconsequential. Like, just say you
Yeah.
got there Saturday and you saw him. Why make up some dumb shit like that? Like, I got here Friday. Like,
Well, there's this
no,
whole story about the Hot Wheel cars and the
yeah,
girls are
yeah,
back. And of course, the whole story revolves around him. It's like they were looking at me like, "Who's this guy? Who's this
yeah,
guy? Who's this guy?" And
yeah.
when they do that, and by the way, Keith Davis Jr. actually says I have one of the best Keefe D impressions on the planet. So if I lapse into that, you'll know why. Uh, the but the thing about it is that he's going in and talking about that, and then he catches him, and he just catches him. So we had to point that out because it's like, listen,
Hmm.
KVD's own worst enemy is KVD.
Right.
Okay, he's inconsistent. You put him up on a stand, God knows what he's going to say, but you can guarantee that when you've heard one KVD story, you've heard one KVD story. Now, I can tell you, some people, oh, you're bagging on KVD. Oh, do that. I've met with KVD. I've talked with KVD about it. I've talked with KVD Jr. and the family about it. They understand because they actually know the man. They understand that he has a habit of kind of blowing things up and building things to be bigger than he is. And this
Right.
time he just got his foot in a bear trap because he did what he usually does. He kind of exaggerates things, makes things up, and he got caught his foot caught in a bear trap. But he doesn't hold me in any way responsible. They've seen the show. They don't hold me responsible in any way for pointing that inconsistency out
Right.
because it's true. It's not a, it's, can I say KVD's own worst enemy? KVD's fine with that because he understands, he knows what the truth is. And the truth is that this looks to be a made up story.
Right. Well, and like I was drawing kind of a loose parallel between him and Reggie. They're both
Mm-hmm.
running their mouths thinking they're untouchable. At this point, Reggie seems to be untouchable, whereas Keefe, he became the Oswald and got jammed up and is now taking the fall for this. But they both ran their mouth with the hubris. In Keefe's case, he thought it was a proffer agreement. He was untouchable. Reggie's
Yeah.
running his mouth thinking he is because he's protected by whatever, feds, LAPD, whatever else. But it's that same notion of being your own worst enemy, it seems like.
Well, it does, but it also, it's interesting the relationship between an informant and their handler or the police who are the parties that they're reporting to. That trust and that action of that handler also has a lot to do with it. So, for example, in the case of Keefe D, his handler was Darren Dupree, Greg Kading, these people there, and they demonstrably threw him under the bus. Okay, both in the book and all that, they took information that he had given them privately. Some might say under a proffer deal, whatever, but gave them the information. And you notice that there's no fact checking of any of it. Not really, because you really can't fact check it. But they still put that information out. And that was a betrayal of the informant trust. Now, meanwhile, you have FBI agents, and we certainly can prove this, that were, like LJ Connolly and who's the other fella? There's the guy. I'll think of his name in a minute, but
Phil?
no, not Phil. No, he was. This was way before Phil. This is the FBI. Dan McMullen.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
these are FBI handlers, and the thing about it is that Reggie's had very, very loyal handlers. Because obviously, if you can keep a secret for almost 30 years that you were never an informant for the FBI, and that comes out for 30 years, starting death row pre Tupac, because again, mind you, he made no mistake about the fact that he wanted to run death row records, and that was not during the time that Tupac was on. It had to have been earlier than that. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you look at his handlers, the veracity of an informant, it depends on his handlers. They're the ones that are going to, in some cases, out you, like Greg Kading did with TVD, flat out outed him, okay, and has gotten a lot of heat from fellow law enforcement agents who said that he shouldn't have done that. And then you have handlers like McMullen or even LJ. I'm not sure how much he kept in the background, but not only did they let them keep their secrets, but then they also paved the way to keep them out of harm's way, keep them out of trouble. Okay. So, and besides, because they understand that, the only way you're going to
Mm,
see the inside of a mole's nest is to be a mole. Okay.
right.
And for them to get arrested and them to get people, they need people to talk. So they set this guy, Reggie Wright Jr., up as a guy that everybody can talk to. He's your best buddy, and he's got that personality. He's your best buddy. He's your best pal, and people feel comfortable talking to him about things. His nickname with the security guys was Rona Barrett, who was a gossip reporter back in the day. So he always liked to talk about the gossip and all that. But he was always this approachable kind of guy that most people could just talk to. Some people thought he was a real nice dude. Others had other opinions, but he was approachable. And of course, that's what got him the information. And he even just admitted, I think, on his last podcast that he did, the last YouTube show he did, that he digs up information on people, that's his thing, that he gets information on people. Well, the reason he does that is because that gives him value to his handlers, and they let him get away with more because obviously you can't, like I said, you can't report on what's in a mole's nest unless you're a mole. So that's really the nature of his. But again, it just depends on the handler, who their handler is.
Right. Well, and as you alluded, I mean, he's kind of, I mean, it was an interesting way to put it, kind of the traffic control of the information with this case, that he was filtering to Las Vegas. It was all being pretty much filtered from Reggie. Whatever they had was from him. Obviously, cherry picked and synthesized and filtered through that lens, but that's all Las Vegas was getting was from the traffic control information, traffic controller of all of this information, who
Yeah,
was
early
Reggie.
on. Yeah, early on. Then, but it happened
Yeah,
with every iteration of the case. Anytime anybody would investigate the
right.
case, even Greg Kading said that the first person they reached out to was Reggie Wright Jr. So there you go. Okay, that's who was they weren't going to be able to talk to Suge Knight. Suge Knight wasn't giving up any information. So the next thing you're going to do is kind of go to Suge Knight's number two guy, and if
Right.
he's willing to talk, congratulations, you've got more information than you had yesterday. I
Exactly.
mean, and that was what most of the police departments went with. They reached out to him, called him. He had some vague information about things, but again, it theoretically put him in a position of being able to control what the police heard and what they didn't hear.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a very unique situation.
Yeah, very unique and powerful position to be put in. Very dangerous, in fact.
Yeah.
Well, and as you talked about, as this narrative of Orlando kind of collapses under its own weight, the clusterfuck begins to manifest even within the investigators in L.A. and Compton. Talk to us about L.A. County Sheriff, this dissension in the ranks, if you will. L.A. County Sheriff Mike Coet saying Greg Kading is lying, and then Greg Kading is saying Coet is lying. And this is kind of where Russell Poole says, man, this is going to be, it would be a nightmare at trial and discovery because you have these two guys kind of on the same side saying each other is lying.
Well, I always say that the people that associate with Reggie Wright Jr., basically form a circular firing squad. Okay.
Yes.
You've got Greg Kading says something, Reggie Wright either confirms it or refutes it. Sometimes he hates him, sometimes he likes him. One day you just never know what side you're on. Then you've got guys like Mike Coet. Now, Mike Coet with LA County Sheriff's Department, he goes on Bomb First, Reggie Wright's channel, does a bunch of interviews. Mike Coet was involved at the very beginning of the conversation, back right after the narrative was first released in 1996. Mike Coet, 97. Mike Coet is actively pursuing Vegas investigators, and Mike Coet was an LA County sheriff, and he's out there in promoting the Orlando Anderson theory, which again had zero evidence, but out there trying to get Vegas to support the Orlando Anderson narrative and continue to keep investigating it that way. No harm, no foul, if that's what he was told by the people around him. I don't hold him accountable for that. But in years later, Mike Coet has taken shots at Greg Kading for his work and saying that he did a bad job, saying that Russ Poole, talking about Russ Poole's last days, he was there, and it's very curious to me why Mike Coet would have been in the meeting with Russ Poole at that time. So a lot of loose
I don't want
ends
to
there.
overstep that because I was just going
Yeah,
to ask you about that. Mike Coet was at that last meeting Russell had where he passed away in the Compton in that sheriff's office, correct?
yeah. Well, that's what he says.
Okay.
Whether he
Okay.
was or he
You had said
wasn't.
that earlier in another episode, and I wanted to reiterate that because
Yeah.
you just brought that
Well,
up.
yeah, whether
Okay.
or not he, again, he says he was. I wasn't there, so he says he was, and
Right.
there's no reason not to take him at his word. And I think that he described the situation with Russ, that he didn't die from a heart attack gun. There was no hit put out on Russ Poole. That
Right.
he had a bad episode with his heart, and that's really what it comes down to. My personal belief, and I don't know if I've ever said this to you, but my personal belief is that Russ had a heart attack because Russ died of a broken heart. I think when we went to the sheriff's department, we didn't go. When he went to the sheriff's department, he and I both went to the LAPD, and we got thrown under the bus and backstabbed by the LAPD. He went to the sheriff's thinking that maybe there would be some grace there because the prosecuting attorney, LA County DA, said that they would move forward with the case if we could get a the sheriff's department to sign off on the investigation. In other words, the DA, who has their own investigators, by the way, can investigate a case all by itself. LA County DA, and they have their own investigators who can tear up the works looking for everything. But what they needed to do is they needed to have what was called a referral from a law enforcement agency. They can't just do it themselves. It has to be referred. It's the way it
Mm,
works. They have
okay.
to be referred from a law
Right.
enforcement agency. LAPD didn't do it clearly. They just leaked our stuff. But the Demersion, who was the prosecutor that was working with us at the time, said that if Russ could go to the LA Sheriff's Department and convince them to refer the case, they would take it from there. Demersion believed what Russ was putting out there. Allegedly, he claimed to have some interest in what was being said there. And Michael Douglas Carlin arranged, through his connection with Lee Baca, the sheriff at the time, that meeting to happen. The unfortunate part was that they asked that Michael Douglas Carlin not be in that meeting. It was just supposed to be Russ, and that was it. So Michael didn't go. I didn't go because I was never invited. I didn't even know about the meeting. And but like I said, Russ, he needed that referral. Russ, he wanted to close that case. He really wanted to know that he had made a difference. It's just the one that got away that he wanted to kind of put closure to. And in the matter of that meeting, he found out that there was not going to be that closure, that was really kind of the end of the road from a police work
Yeah.
standpoint that would help him reclaim that ground that he felt had been lost over the years. And I think it broke his heart. I do. I think that realization is actually what killed him. I could never prove that, obviously, and
Well, and
emotions.
it was an ongoing thing. Clearly, he was going through. I mean, corny. He was a cop's cop. Like he was one of the most revered. I mean, you don't become head of robbery homicide if you're just some gumshoe out there. And you said, his dad was a cop. I mean, he was so deeply ensconced in law enforcement, and to have that realization, it seemed like that what he swore to serve and protect was just kind of a throwaway line with some of his higher ups, and they were just willing to go along or look away from this shit. And then he quit. Tells his wife, "I'm going to quit." Like, wait, what are we talking about? You're so close to being done and pension. He's like, "Nah." I mean, to dip out like that when you're so close to the end, he just couldn't be around it anymore. Couldn't lend any more of his energy to that shit. And then, like you said, going to that final meeting and see it's not going anywhere. I mean, it sounds cliche, died of a broken heart, but I could totally see it, man.
Yeah. That's how I, that's how I felt about it. That the I felt like the last part of our story in chapter 6 was to, talk about that, to talk about Russ's last days. And what, when Megan, his wife, found out about what had happened. I mean, they were together, they weren't apart or anything like that, but she was working that day, and then she got the call. She couldn't believe it. She had heard that Russ was gone. And the sad part about it was, that was just a few weeks before his daughter's wedding.
Yeah, that was
And,
we're jumping ahead, and we're going to get to that part because that was absolutely heartbreaking. But
yeah.
as we continue here in this episode, we move on to, again, Michael Moore reiterates he was intimately involved in all of this. Spent his last days with Pac, refused to disarm, heard, got him. And as Michael Moore says, he was never ever interviewed by the Las Vegas Police Department. Somebody so close to Pac in that last day, never spoken to once.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things in this entire investigation, we're talking about 20 years, and that's a big statement. One of
Yeah.
the most interesting things that I found from a documentation evidence standpoint is when the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department had to actually turn over their investigative files to the Center for Investigative Journalism, and they had to actually produce the police records. The other thing they did was they produced what was called a privilege log, which is a list of everything they've got in the file, and like an index almost of what they have in the file. You may not see the document itself, but you'll notice there's a document that's about this, and they have to mark those down. And they presented that as well. One of the things that shocked me was that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department conducted a grand total in a 20-year investigation at that point, because it's 2018, so it had been 22 years. They had conducted 9 recorded interviews. 9. In 22 years, they recorded 9 interviews, or had interviews that they felt were worth recording. Okay. And that's stunning, because
Yeah.
that, the and by the way, 8 of those 9 interviews, or 7 of those 9 interviews, I'm sorry, were recorded the night of the shooting. So
Wow.
they only felt it was necessary to record. I mean, when you're doing an interview, clearly you want to record it. If it's going to be important enough, you're going to record it. But they only felt that that was necessary in 22 years, 2 times. They thought that was necessary. And that's staggering. I mean, that just knocks the wind out of you when you look at it
Yeah.
like that. And you say, holy mackerel, there just isn't an interest in this. There just was,
Right.
the work just wasn't put in on this.
And that's a staggering number, and that just belies the notion that, like you said, they didn't want to solve this. That's by design. I
Right.
mean, the limited questioning. That's, I mean, you don't want to talk. If you want to solve it, you want to talk to a lot, as many people as possible. When you don't, you talk to 9 or 2, basically over 20
Yeah,
years,
too,
seven
because
the night
they
of.
took tape statements. They took tape recorded statements from 7 people at the scene, including like Frank Alexander and that. I mean, it was just an insane low number of contacts. And when Michael Moore says that he wasn't talked to, I mean, amazingly, you would think, and I'll give you just one snapshot example. Tupac went back between the fight at the MGM Hotel and the going to Suge's house. He stopped in his hotel room. Okay. Tracy Robinson was there. Kadada Jones was there. I think a couple of the Outlaws were there in this hotel room. Now, if you're going to say that the murder was a result of a revenge plot based on a fight at the MGM, don't you think you'd want to interview every single one of those people and ask them what Tupac said
Right.
about the fight, what Tupac's reaction was, what he said, how it started, because he may tell this person one piece of information, he may tell another person something else, not different, but just an additional piece of information, if you will. That every one of those people would have been material witnesses if you're going to establish, like they are now, that the shooting was a result of a fight at a hotel. Well, Tupac left the fight at the hotel, went up to his room, and had conversations with 4 or 5 people minimum.
Right.
Frank
Yeah.
Alexander was even there fixing his chain. Okay. he had this conversation. You would expect, or I would think
You would
anyway,
think.
you would
Yeah.
think that a person that was investigating it would want to get the statements from every single person that was in that room, because they're the ones that are going to have the personal firsthand account from the victim or the suspect, whichever one you want to call them in that situation,
Yeah.
um, of what happened. Like, what did he have to say about Orlando Anderson? Did he know Orlando Anderson prior to the fight? What did Trayvon Lane whisper in his ear?
Right.
Did he tell you anything? Did Tupac tell you anything? But these are people, Tracy Robinson, Kadada Jones, these are people that were there and were never interviewed. So if you just take that one single snapshot of a class of people that were in the hotel room when Tupac went back after the MGM incident, you didn't interview those people. Why not?
Not a one. And you
Were
would
they
think
hard
that
to
would be
find?
literally standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
Standard.
Were they hard to find? I mean, because
Right.
anytime you look at that, you may find out that there was somebody else involved, or what was whispered in his ear. That somebody knows what's whispered in his ear. Well, now they're never going to say, but back in the day, it may have been incidental to them. It may have been no big deal. Yeah, Tupac told me
Right.
that Trayvon whispered, "That's the guy that took my chain." And it would have been incidental to them because it wouldn't have thought anything. There's no significance to it because they don't understand the context. If you interview them right away, they don't necessarily understand the context that the shooting is related to this or that they're building that case. They just ask, "Hey, did he tell you anything about that?" Trayvon Lane whispered, "Yeah, he told me there's a guy who stole your chain," or "F that guy," or whatever.
Well, that
But
would have
those
been interesting in the context if he did, if we do know he said something about the chain in the context of um, Frank being asked to lie about when the chain incident happened, because they made it seem like it was that day or something more fresher than what it actually was, if it even happened. So I mean, it is somewhat germane to the conversation. But you're right. Why? What did Trayvon say? Why don't we know this? Like all those questions were not answered. Were not
and I'm
asked
not
to be
saying
answered.
that Tupac may have told. Maybe Tupac was dismissive about it and said, "Ah, nothing really happened." What happened? Your chain's broken. You look scuffled up. You're clearly hyped up because you were. Everybody knows there was a fight.
Right.
So maybe Tupac said something about it. Maybe Tupac talked about it. Maybe he didn't. But you know what? We'll never know that because they never interviewed a damn person
Yes.
in that room.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Clearly
understand what I mean?
something was said to put a battery in his back to make him go do what he did, but of course, like we said, we'll never know because the
Well, right,
proper
because they never bothered to ask anybody. Maybe he
right
said something, maybe he didn't, but of course, we'll never know. We'll never have the option of knowing that or not
facts.
because nobody bothered to preserve the witness statements that may or may not be important later. And they didn't do that. They did
Right.
like Michael Moore, same thing. So there's other security guards. There should have been a lot of conversation about why the operations of the security group were the way that they were. Why was there not? You notice there was never a recorded interview with Reggie Wright Jr.
Hmm.
in the Vegas police file. There's no
I know
recorded
he
interview with Reggie
within
Wright Jr.
minutes of the shooting calls his pops.
Well, that's true, but in the Vegas Police Department
Right.
records, if you want to interview what was happening and why Orlando Anderson might have been the guy that Tupac jumped out at when he's a security threat, you probably want to interview the head of security for the record label and
You would
say,
think.
yeah, and say, okay, were you aware of any particular threats? Or did he know Orlando Anderson prior to it? Because again, if you're going to make the claim that Orlando Anderson shot him out of a revenge motive, you're going to want to know from the head of security whether or not they even knew who Orlando Anderson was.
Right.
Okay. How do you know Trayvon Lane? Is Trayvon Lane an honest guy? He whispers some. Did he provoke a fight? Did he set this whole thing up? Did it all flow from misinformation? Yeah, again, these are
Hmm.
all people that you could ask. I didn't see an
Right.
interview with Trayvon Lane.
Nothing. Yeah. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
those things would have cleared up so much stuff,
Well,
but within that
never saw an
fog of
interview with
yeah,
Orlando Anderson either, for that matter.
yeah. And again, when you don't have that, that is again telling in and of itself that this basic standard operating procedure was not followed. So,
Right.
um, as we kick the can down the road here, we move to Reggie Wright Jr. once again denying knowing certain death row employees who happen to be also law enforcement: Mac Perez, Durden, Gaines, Martin, and Reggie says, "Aren't these? I don't know them, but aren't these guys all Kevin Gaines' friends?" Just like throwing everybody else under the. I didn't know shit, but isn't this Kevin Gaines' people? The guy who was fucking Suge's wife and potentially could be the trigger man. I had nothing to do with it, but isn't this Kevin's friends? It's like, dude, sociopath, man.
Well, again, information, telling information. That's the MO of a guy is, he gathers information, he provides information. Sometimes he provides disinformation. Okay. So, he says they're all Suge's guys. I mean, Kevin Gaines and Mac and Perez, they're all Suge's guys. Well, Kevin Gaines would never have been one of Suge's guys. I think he later recants and says something like that. But ultimately, the fact that Mac and Perez, everybody but Reggie Wright Jr. knew that Mac Perez, uh, Nino
Right.
Durden, Sammy Martin, these other LAPD cops all worked with Death Row Records. We don't know that they were paid. Okay, we don't know. Sometimes cops, if they like the person. I've had bodyguards work for free. I've had a professional bodyguard, a former cop, work for me and watch my back, and he did it as a favor for me. I'm sure Phil would probably do it as a favor. But so to say that they were employees of Death Row Records, we don't know what the employment relationship was with
Sure.
Perez, Gaines, all these guys, but we do know that they were heavily involved with it. They were clearly there. They were acting in a role supporting the security of artists like Snoop and like Tupac, and were there. So when Phil Carson says that, he's either the worst manager that ever lived, speaking about Reggie Wright, he's either the worst manager that ever lived, or he's a fucking liar, or both.
Oh, both.
you know that to deny, I mean, because again, how oblivious can you be when these people are out and about around? And again, you're not talking about the guy that stood at the door, although Suge does say that they stuck Reggie out at a desk outside of the death row offices at a little like metal desk, and he wasn't allowed to actually go into the death row offices. He stood outside, sat at a desk outside of that. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what Suge said. But the but as the head of security, if you're just a door shaker, I wouldn't expect you to know much about what's happening within the operations of your
Right.
organization. You're the head of security. That's a whole different mantle. And words matter. Head of security, words matter. And so you have a responsibility to Suge, your employer, Death Row, your employer, to know what the hell's going on. How do you assess threats if you don't understand what's
Well,
going
and
on?
even in this episode, listening to Reg talk fucking both sides out of his mouth, he literally was the head of, right way security, death row security. And in this episode, he literally says, like, I'm not, whatever, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not a security guy. Like, I was around Suge, but I don't. And you guys show the business card, right way security head, Reggie Wright. But yet, even in the face of that, like, he was the
Yeah, I
head of
was Suge's
security, but
guy. I was
denying
Suge's
any,
guy. I wasn't secure. I wasn't really security. I was Suge's
dude,
guy. Oh, really? So Suge gave you $250,000 to do nothing. Yeah, to
exactly.
be his guy, right? Yeah.
And this
Okay.
is what in his own kind of
Sure.
ineptitude, mental ineptitude, he's distancing himself even as a security person, even though he was the head of right wing security. But we digress. We digress.
Yeah,
It,
exactly.
it,
None of that matters.
and I know
Facts
it's
aren't
what's so
important.
it's that's painful listening to Reggie sometimes, a lot of times. But even in this episode, and again, not to go deep down the rabbit hole of like JFK or any conspiracy, like, oh, there's no way this huge thing could, somebody would have told. And people have told. But again, all you need is certain people to do it, and the certain right people to help cover up. And in this case, and even the big case, we're not talking about big, but this in the same function of these apparatus, you have the LA Times, LAPD, city attorney, DA's office executing this cover up. That's what you need. All you
Yeah.
need is people in those key places to cover this up because people have told. But since the official narrative is XYZ that's been doubled down by the official channels, this is what it is. And that's
Mhm.
the spooky shit to me, man. Everyone can. And Gloria was the head of, I forget what periodical in the episode here. She's basically talking kind of like the JFK thing. We'll maybe never know the full truth. We can speculate and hypothesize, but since the official narrative is XYZ, everything else is kind of speculation and hypothesis.
Yep. True.
But again, having those big forces involved to double down on the cover up, like Phil was saying, Phil Carson, FBI agent Phil Carson, people wonder sometimes what's worse, the crime or the cover up. Obviously, like you said, there's a dead body that's terrible, but these institutions that double down on the cover up is just as disheartening.
Well, we have to also take a look at, and I agree with you on that, but we also have to take a look at how many bodies were sacrificed to advance a bad narrative. They want to talk about gang war, and we dismantled that. But let's be honest, gang people died, and I can't tell you whether or not this person that got shot was because it was a day in the life in Compton and it was a gang thing, or maybe this guy got shot because somebody didn't like the fact that the Crips took out or allegedly took out Tupac and Suge, or that they dared to act and these people died. A lot of death row affiliates died. I tend to use Occam's razor and say, well, they were drug dealers, and a lot of them, and convicted felons, and so they lived a very dangerous lifestyle that caught up with them. That would be Occam's razor, with the simplest explanation being the best.
Sure.
But in terms of a lot of these guys, we don't know. We don't know why Hen Dog was killed. We don't know why Buntry was killed. We don't know why these people, their death row affiliates, were killed. But one thing I do know is that a lot of people, as Brent Becker said, a lot of people have died
Yes.
as a result of this case. And if we find out that those deaths were used in service to a false narrative or to support a false narrative, and we're talking about even Biggie Smalls, if it turns out that Biggie Smalls' death was
Retribution.
in service to a false narrative,
Yeah.
that's the tragedy of that's insane. So,
Sure.
those that I believe are involved with the cover up, have villages of the dead watching them.
Seriously.
When they go to sleep at night, you've got just crowds of the dead watching them because they decided in a very knee-jerk rushed situation to pick a narrative and run with it, and then double down on it, and then triple down on it, and then
Right.
quadruple down on it.
Yes.
That's what this has all been about. And again, that like I said, it's tragic what happened to Russ. It's tragic what happened to Michael Moore, Frank. These are all people, and whether or not they died directly as a result of the investigation or for whatever reason they died, their lives were never straight after that happened.
Right.
Okay, the fairest statement I can make is no one, it's kind of like it was toxic. No one who was involved with Death Row Records, period, when they came into Death Row Records, how they left Death Row Records or when they left, they were never the same and they were never better for it. Okay. Even, Snoop might be a guy who says, oh, he escaped all that, did that. There was a period of time when he wasn't doing so well. Okay. He was not the de jour caricature that he is now. And
Snoop's everywhere now.
he wasn't doing well. Suge Knight went to prison. I mean, none of these people that most of the rest of them are dead. Most of these people, and then the ones that weren't dead, from my research and interviews that I'm doing, a lot of these cats were left hanging. They didn't get paid for the work that they did, and which could have actually, if it had been released, made them a lot of money. So you had a lot of people who did get paid. So their lives were kind of jacked too, because they certainly didn't go into the situation with the record label with the idea that they were going to be negatively
No, yeah.
affected, by the end of it, by the end
For
of the
sure.
story,
Definitely went
they
into
were
it
going to
with
get a little bit
rose
better.
colored glasses. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right, man. The bodies around this is something that's so heartbreaking. It is a huge part of this ripple effect of these events. Not just, well, we're sticking with Pac, but I mean, not the chronology. So after Pac, like within, I don't know, weeks, his best friend growing up, Yafa Fula, he goes back to New Jersey, and there's speculation he was killed execution style, and there's speculation as to how that
Look,
played out.
there's not, the police reports say he was killed mafia style, mafia execution style. The police
Right,
reports say that. I mean, there's no, that's, to me, that's not speculation. That's a presumption based on experience.
right.
You and I can guess about it, but when a police writes in a police report and puts it on record that as a fact, he was killed mafia execution style, I think we can
Yeah.
stop saying it's speculation and say, you know what, that's fact.
Well, and yeah, that's the factual part. But you hear people rumor like, oh, somebody misfired or whatever. But I'm just saying that the deaths that are surrounding this, even though the chronology of it, like Yafa Fula died very, very close after this. Like you said, Frank Alexander, Michael Moore, both dying, I believe, in 2013 from apparent suicides. I always am suspicious of suicides relating to such huge cases like this. And maybe they did. Again, you said, like you've alluded to, that this has had a heavy effect on these guys. And even after the Biggie case, this guy is supposedly suspected to have been involved in Tupac shooting. Kevin Gaines is dead a week after the Biggie shooting. So you have a lot of people dying that are Buntry, like you were talking about, who are involved or surrounding this. Orlando Johnson winds up catching a huge L however long after this. So again, for me, that a lot of tying up a lot of loose ends, it seems like. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
A lot
mean,
of
what would Orlando Anderson's life had been like if he hadn't been the guy associated with the killing of Tupac Shakur? I mean,
right,
and we talk about, the butterfly effect, really. I mean, the
sure,
the fact that Orlando Anderson's life was altered forever because of that fight at the MGM and the suspicions that he had something to do with the shooting. I would say that his life made there was a fork in the road there, and whatever his life was going to be was never going to be that again. And so all the way to his death, maybe his death wouldn't have happened because he wouldn't have been in that car wash, because he wouldn't have been doing this, because he would have been doing that. And you take it all the way back to the event of that night where he's, for whatever reason, beat up at the MGM and then blamed for the shooting of Tupac Shakur.
right.
That his death, it's like, was that even necessary, or would that have even happened if this narrative that was never supported,
Right.
never proven, no gun, no car, no witnesses, even back then, people just blaming Orlando Anderson for the killing because he was, you know, silly logic. Okay, he was beat up earlier, so he's got to be the guy, right?
Right.
No
Right.
other person in the world could have done it. But would his life have been spared? Would he have been killed at that car wash? Maybe he wouldn't have been at that car wash. He could have been living in the valley doing something else. But
But he was
again,
kind of he was off the porch and was about that life anyway. So who knows? I mean, we could all speculate, but it's not like he was reading psalms on the corner to the local L.A. community. I mean, he was about that life a little bit. Who knows where it could have ended up? But yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, the what ifs, man. It going back
yeah,
to the beginning. But as we wrap up this final episode, man, and you alluded to it earlier, and you knew him. Like I told you earlier, I first made the acquaintance of the gentleman named Russell Poole in the 2002 Biggie and Tupac documentary, and I fell in love with the guy, man. I mean, he was like that Serpico, or just that cop speaking truth to power, the mouse fighting a gorilla. And like Sergio Robledo said, man, we were blessed to have Russ, man. We're blessed with a cop like that, and I think any police department would be blessed with a Russell Poole. And you alluded to it, and again, man, it just it broke my heart watching Megan explain how she got the news, and obviously just the heartbreak that it's ensued from that, and his daughter Jennifer asking who's going to walk me down the aisle. And Russ, I'm sorry, RJ, I thank you for kind of breaking the fourth wall, seeing your friend was in need, coming from behind the camera and hugging her and holding her. I mean, that was really powerful, bro.
yeah.
Um,
Megan and Russ were a big part of my life, for years. And I didn't just develop friendship with him; I did friendship with her, friendship with Kurt Poole, his son, Doug Poole. They were I won't say daily, but frequent interactions with them. There was a point in time, it's no secret to anybody that, Russ lived at my house. Russ and Megan were at our house and stayed at our house for a period of time. So, you don't get to know a person better than that.
right.
I always hate, when people like Megan are brave enough to go there and talk about it, but it's a painful thing to make anybody go through, and my heart just went out to her because no one asked her. She did it out of the goodness of her heart, to explain that there was no reason that she had to. She did it for me, as a friend to talk about these things because we thought that they were important to talk about.
Yeah.
But the emotional toll that it took just broke my heart. I was
It
crying
was
and couldn't
huge.
see
And
it.
again, even in that moment, her explaining, I mean, it comes, I mean, obviously it's legitimate. She says to you, man, thank you for being his friend. Thank you for being there for him. I mean, it just, you weren't just somebody who just, some pedestrian or some spectator, like, hey, I know, I've heard of you guys. Let me interview you. Like I said, you intimately had knowledge of this family. And I don't know, that just makes it all of this so much more powerful, man. And your access
Rustful
to these guys.
Rustful was my hero.
Yeah, no, he's
He's
without a
he's
shadow
a
of a
good
doubt.
friend and he was my hero.
Rest in peace, Russ, and the whole family, man. Hope you guys are doing well. As we wind down this episode, this final episode, we you know it's all laid out, man. Everything is laid out, and at the end here, we hook up again with a gentleman by the name of Kenneth Boagni. Kenneth Boagni was the cellmate of Rafael Perez. And he says a couple days after the shooting of Tupac, there was a security meeting. And in the presence of this meeting was David Mack, Rafael Perez, and Kevin Gaines. And I believe David Kenner was there. David Kenner, the lawyer for Death Row Records, and he said after the meeting, after security was dismissed, Kenneth Boagni feels and says he heard, I believe it was Kenner speaking to Mack and Perez, saying we need to get something together to take care of the problem. He
Well,
feels that
actually,
problem.
let me straighten
Yeah,
that
help
out.
me out. Help me out. Help me out.
Yeah, let me help you out with that. Actually, it's a little different than that.
Okay.
Kenny, you can call him Boagni, Bogni, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
him. He wasn't there. Rafael Perez was his cellmate, and the information that he's providing is what was told to him by Rafael
Secondhand.
Perez,
Okay.
allegedly. Okay. Now it's firsthand because he was there. He's what Rafael
Well, I'm
Perez.
just saying Kenneth wasn't there. He's getting
Right.
this information
So
secondhand from Rafael.
allegedly, Rafael Perez told him that at the meeting, the death row meeting, where Michael Moore spoke about, and he had spoken in a vacuum about that because nobody else was willing to verify that that ever happened.
I'm sorry. Please allow me to. When that meeting was there, the artists were there too, and they were questioning security. What were you
Okay.
guys doing? What happened? I'm sorry, I
Sure.
forgot that
Okay.
part
So
because that's huge.
let's step back for a minute. Okay. So there was Michael Moore speaks early in the documentary, speaks about a meeting that happened after the shooting of Tupac Shakur at Death Row Records headquarters. Suge called a meeting. All of the artists, or many of the artists, were in attendance at that meeting, along with certain members of security. And again, certain members of security, like Frank Alexander, were not asked to be at that meeting, which is very peculiar. But certain members, like Michael Moore, were. And in that meeting, the artists were questioning security about what methods they had used and why did this cluster F of a situation even happen in the first place, which I think is legitimate. If you're an artist, you're worried about it. Am I going to be the next one in one of these kind of bozo situations? And what kind of
Exactly.
security group or non-security group now, as we're being told, and what did you not do right, or why did you not have radios? We heard you guys didn't have radios. What is all this about? We were told you guys were
Told
told
not
not
to
to
carry
carry guns.
guns.
Right.
Your
So
security.
they had this meeting. They had this meeting, and Michael Moore felt like Reggie wasn't saying anything and that he spoke up and said, we were told not to carry any weapons. And so this meeting happened, and I guess it took a little bit of time. People spoke at the meeting and that. And then the meeting ended. And as the meeting ended, um, Bray Perez and Mac were called into a side office and were told basically that we got to go get Biggie, and that was the kind of, we called left it as a cliffhanger,
Right.
but ultimately we thought it was warranted because that was the actual, I believe, final, maybe not chronologically, but that was the final pinnacle of this revenge narrative.
Yeah.
And then everything after that was just confirming that. But many people believe, as I do, that Biggie Smalls was killed in furtherance of a false narrative.
Exactly. To
And
reaffirm that
so
false narrative. Yeah.
yeah, so that was how we chose to wrap it. It was kind of a stinger. I actually took a lot of heat from some people that know the story very well. They said that I stuck the landing with the ending of Cover Up, but then I put that stinger on the end of it, and they hated it. I mean, I actually got a lot of negative feedback about the Bodney thing because he says, well, you closed the door on a lot of speculation and then you opened it back up again. It's like ripping the band-aid off. And but it was one of those things that I felt like the story doesn't end with what I know. There's more to it than just that.
Well, and I know Biggie isn't your thing, but Suge has said, and not that Suge is the paragon of virtue and truth. If you solve Tupac, you solve the other one, and I absolutely believe that
Yep.
because I believe a lot of the same players were involved, man.
Yep.
So again, this is where we wrap this final episode, season one. RJ has laid out such an amazing tapestry of information. And some of it he allows you to draw your own conclusions. But I think at the end of the day, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, he's showing what didn't happen. This is not an Orlando Anderson culprit, for this murder and the cover up. It's so much bigger than that. And everyone, please, Zumo, Tubi, check out Tupac cover up. This is absolutely worth your time. And RJ is definitely been working on this for not just this, but the whole Tupac assassination series for a long time. And it's crazy, dude. We've been doing this for
Well,
a few months now, and I think it was Monday or last week. There was a bit of a development in Keefe's case, man. Talk to us about this new information, I guess, that's coming out and put it into context. Who are these investigators? What's going on, man?
well, the I'll talk about that, and then something I wanted to add on the end of
Sure.
that. In the last couple of weeks, the defense, KVD's defense, has decided now they're going to start filing their objections and their motions for continuance of a trial date because they needed to move it. They didn't have enough time. And one of the reasons they said they didn't have enough time to go to trial in March when it was scheduled, that they needed more time, is that there was some investigating that they needed to do. So they requested from the court a private investigator, and in certain limited circumstances and for a limited budget, the public pays for a private investigator for a defendant. Yeah, I think it's 10 hours of time that they get with a private investigator that they can hire and pay somebody to investigate things. And the reason that they said they needed the investigator and the circumstances that they were investigating, and the reason that they needed time to investigate it, which I could certainly understand, was that they put forth two interesting narratives. They were investigating whether or not Tupac was actually in stable condition, quote unquote, alive when he suddenly died a week later, that he didn't actually directly die from a gunshot wound. It might have been an attributing factor, but he did not die from the gunshot wound. So therefore, he wasn't killed by a gunshot wound, and therefore there's no murder. That's one speculation, and I'm really on the fence against it. But the other one was much more interesting in that one that said that they are investigating the leads that Reginald Wright Jr. set up and orchestrated the murder of Tupac Shakur. And to posit that as an alternative theory, I think is not only a smart thing to do, but what I keep having to remind people that are Reggie Wright Jr. apologists, that I'm not the only one that believes that. I'm not the only one that has information that may lead to that presumption. I'm not the only one who questions not just the activities of the evening and the negligence, but
Yeah.
some of the other moves that were made and then things that were done after the fact. So seeing that happen now, what I'm glad about is that I'm glad that it's actually on the record now in terms of court filings, so that I can actually say that he is a considered an alternative possible suspect in the hearing on KVD.
Which is
So
which is interesting because he was in the grand jury testimony to indict Keefe
right, and that's a you get two for the price of one. You discredit one of the prosecution witnesses, and then pivot on that and make him your alternative theory.
Right.
So it's definitely something that's been a something to watch. We'll kind of see how that progresses. The trial got delayed by a year. Good Lord,
Yeah.
week, month, year. Let's go and get
Yeah.
it right.
All of them.
Okay. Oh yeah, it's delayed for a year, February 26th, and we'll see where it goes. And so what I was going to wrap with was that, I got asked why. I did the assassination movies, I did the book. By 2017, I was pretty much done with the subject matter of Tupac and Biggie. Okay. And I've been asked more than a few times, why did you do cover up? What got you interested in doing it again? And the reality of it is it's just a very simple belief. You ask the question, is this case against Keefe D about justice,
Mm.
or is this case about blame? Now, the other part of it was, in my firm belief over the years, that people that like to advance the Orlando Anderson narrative they have, before we ever got along with Tupac assassination. By that time, they had 11 years in front of the public screaming through the megaphone to brainwash the public to believe a certain thing. They had plenty of time to do that. We came along 11 years later and tried to change that. I'm invested in the cover up and the docuseries, because I firmly believe that it doesn't matter what your other theory is going to be, Jeff. It could be Kevin Gaines did it. It could be Reggie Wright did it. It could be the Man on the Moon did it. Oprah did it. Whatever. 13,000 people confessed to the murder of Tupac Shakur.
Right.
Okay. It could be any one of them. But I guarantee you that as long as the Orlando Anderson narrative has wind or it has oxygen,
Yeah.
that you're never going to hear anything else. You won't hear about any other, because, again, a fire needs oxygen. You kill the oxygen, you kill the fire. And then you might actually be able to then look at an alternative theory, but it makes so much noise and it's so big that you have to clear that first. And if that means the Keefe D walks, listen, I'm not a fan of how Keefe D has managed his life. Okay.
Right.
Um,
That's a
you
whole
know,
separate
that,
conversation.
yeah. But in terms of whether or not an innocent man, regardless of what he claims to be, an innocent man
Right.
is freed or guilty. Um, if that's the consequence of this, then that's fine. That it is what it is. But I think that until this happens, this had to happen until
Yeah.
at some point, because if the time comes that Keefe D is found not guilty, of course, Vegas isn't going to do anything more about it. They're done.
Right.
Um, but at that point, once it's been established that this theory has no legs, the minute that it's established by a jury, hopefully, that there's no oxygen left in the room, there's no fire, then we'll finally be able to say, okay, well, now that that's been set aside and put to rest, what about these other things? And again, Vegas police probably not going to investigate any of it, but
No.
it still allows people like me, like others, to put up alternative narratives that might equally or better explain the killing of Tupac Shakur. And then, whether or not that leads to justice is a different story, but I
Right.
can't control that. But I
And
do
like you said,
think,
this is a mouse fighting a gorilla in this fire that keeps receiving these oxygen from things like Unsolved and Murder Rap and,
right.
TV series and these official studios that are backing this bullshit. It
Well,
just
I
makes
mean,
it that
and you
much
look
more.
at the credibility, Jeff, of the mainstream media right now. I mean, they're
No,
liars.
facts.
They're
Whole
liars.
facts. And
And
that's why I
so,
think, I was talking to you earlier. That's why I have so much respect for the work you've put in, put your own name, reputation, treasure on the line to keep following this. And I'm glad you've done it. And especially in the face of the bullshit,
yeah,
resumed your fight. And I guess, before we sign off, we're not going anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. We're keeping this ball rolling. My man RJ and I have signed up. We are about to knock out Tupac Assassination, the podcast, right here on that podcast network. Stay tuned for that because it's
it's going
coming
to be
soon. I
big.
know the trial's been pushed back and it's given us a little bit of runway to keep this ball rolling. RJ's been at it 20 years. He's not new to this game, but we're about to team up and do some dynamic duo style business with Tupac Assassination, the podcast. Stay tuned
Yeah,
because it's coming.
we've got there's a lot of material. You got to understand, when you open the vaults up, you do an hour and a half documentary, you've probably shot 25 hours. I've done, three movies, arguably four movies. I've done a book. and a docu-series. I mean, we've got probably edited 15 hours of footage, and that's edited. So the hundreds of hours of footage that you're going to get, we're going to start picking out. We're going to start doing deep cuts. We're going to
Nice.
start doing stuff that you've never seen or heard before. And we're going to have a lot of fun doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate you being down to team up with me to make it happen, man. I got nothing but love and respect for you, everything you've done for this subject. I mean, it's awesome, dude. It's awesome to team up with you, man. Nothing but love, nothing but respect. Any final words, man, as we wrap up this final episode? Tupac cover up, ladies and gentlemen. Zumo, Tubi, go check it out. You do not want to miss this.
No, the only thing I can add again is that always don't let this be about blame. Let it be about justice.
Without a doubt, man. Without a shadow of a doubt. RJ, I came to you many months ago and said I wanted to interview you about this docu series. Let's said, dude, let's break down each episode. You'll get more mileage out of it. And I'm so thank you. I can't thank you enough for being so gracious with your time. And I always say hard work begets more hard work. And through this, we're about to knock it out of the box with Tupac Assassination, the podcast. Again, can't thank you enough, my friend. I really look forward to this.
Me too. We'll talk soon, Jeff. Take care.
All right, peace and so much love, guys. Stay tuned. You know what it is. There will always be more.